Hello and welcome to Saving Lives in Slow Motion. I'm Dr. Ian Panja, and each week I'll give you honest and refreshing perspectives to help you put health into context. There's so much health information out there it can be confusing. People have even asked me to be their personal medical advisor. Well, this is the next best thing. Now, on with the episode. How are you? Thanks again for joining me. And if you could do me a favour, like, subscribe and share, because it helps me keep this podcast going. Now, today I'm going to be talking about breathing and breathwork. It's something that's been poorly understood in medicine or not given enough prominence or value. And one of the reasons for that is that medicine historically looks to detect disease and treat it. And in the world of breathing, that would mean respiratory medicine. But I want to go back more to basics. And when I go back to my childhood, I remember when on sports day we were running the 100 metres and we were watching the Olympics and, Carl Lewis was on or Linford Christie. There was a lot of science going on at the time about ventilation and how you breathe. And for short races like the 100 metres, you hold your breath for significant proportions of a race, like the 100 metres. Obviously not if you're a school child. And the other thing I noticed was, without realising at the time what it was, is that breathing is an unconscious activity. So you're not meant to think about it too much. And what we used to do at school is if you wanted to put someone off a race, you'd go, really focus on your breathing pattern. And once you start thinking about breathing in and out, it becomes quite laboured and difficult because it's an automatic process unless you do think about it. So in meditation, for example, you're meant to observe the breath, not try and control the breath. But what is it about breathing? I mean, is it beneficial and can you breathe incorrectly? Now, clinically, I became interested in this many years ago when I would speak to people who were suffering with panic attacks. And of course, there are many reasons behind panic attacks, deep-seated anxiety, or painful emotions that come to the fore, or sometimes subconscious things from the past. But one thing I found in common with a group of people with panic attacks, I'd say probably about a third, is to do with their breathing and also their chest anatomy. So tight chest muscles, particularly around the sternum, seem to affect this group, and they often also have reflux or acid symptoms. And in my experience, this tends to be people of a taller, slimmer frame. And the other thing I find is that, again, another group that seem to present with anxiety or panic are the group that are mouth breathers. And they often say, I can't breathe through my nose. Now, sometimes there's something physical going on to do with the shape of the palate or a chronically blocked nose, and they need sorting out medically or dentally, and that can mean braces. And of course I'm talking about people under the age of 21 here, but this can carry on into later life, particularly those with a narrow shaped palate, or for example nasal polyps or some sort of nasal obstruction. And apart from anything else, mouth breathing is associated with risks, potentially including cardiovascular disease. So it's an important one to think about with breathing. So we're still on the sort of basics of breathing. So bottom line here is in through your nose and out through your nose. Sounds really simple, but some people don't or can't do it. So there's a physiological reason for that. And part of it is that, the mucosa, the lining of your nose, in some way acts as a filter. And if you're a mouth breather, then the air's going through the mouth, which can predispose you to other problems like I mentioned, including things like hay fever, bizarrely. What else about breathing? Well, it's an odd one because it sort of irritates a lot of doctors because we don't really get taught a lot about this aspect of breathing as medics. And as someone who used to do a lot of singing at some point in my life, my singing teacher taught me about belly breathing, and this is essentially something quite easy to work out if you're doing it or not. So when you breathe, your shoulders should remain level. They shouldn't move up or down, but your belly should move in and out. And that's something that's called diaphragmatic breathing. Why is it a big deal? Many of you may have heard of this belly breathing. Well, a number of reasons. One is that it reduces your demand for oxygen, so it's much more efficient in terms of getting oxygen into the lungs. It's less effortful, and it strengthens your diaphragm. So it's not just something that's recommended for no good reason. There are biological benefits, and it's something you can practice. You can lie on your back and breathe with your hand on your belly and watch your hand move as your belly rises if you're doing belly breathing. As always, there are links in the show notes, so don't worry. But the thing to sort of take away is that breathing is linked to our biology and also how we feel in terms of stress, and how it impacts things like our vagus nerve, which I've talked about before, which is a nerve that runs from our brain to our gut and has lots of branches that go off to other areas, and is the nerve that is stimulated when we feel relaxed. So what about breath work? Well, a simple premise of basic breath work is to get yourself out of fight or flight, which is when you're feeling panic or anxiety, or, when something acute stresses you, you suddenly feel your heart racing and your breathing rate goes up and you feel anxious. And it's a generally agreed premise that if you slow your breathing down, that is a good way to get yourself out of fight or flight. So a while ago, I came across someone on our road who'd sat down and was having a panic attack, was really distressed, sat against a wall outside someone's house. And I got her to sort of breathe with me and count, in for 1 and then out for 2, and then in for 2 and then out for 3, and then in for 3 and then out for 4. It took a minute or so, but it worked. Now, there are lots of different types of breath work, but very simply what it does is it stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, the vagus nerve, the calming, sort of resting and digesting element of your nervous system, the exact opposite of fight or flight, which is when you're on high alert and there's lots of adrenaline bounding around. And many of you who have followed my work for a while will know that I do this thing called the 1-minute recharge. I do it when I pull into work in the car and when I pull in at home. And it means I sit in the car and breathe for a minute. And the reason I do that is because just that minute does 2 things. One, it separates a particular segment of the day, so I'm ready to face the next bit. And secondly, if I'm bombarded with anything stressful when I walk into work, which is often the case, I'm much better at taking that and receiving it without a sort of a stress response, if you like. Now that's how it works for me, and the only other times I do it really is when I do yoga or use a meditation app. And yes, I do that because I feel better, but actually there is evidence that it helps manage stress in terms of brainwave activity, so mental health benefits, as well as effects on heart rate variability, which is the variation in time between each heartbeat and is a marker of well-being. Now, there's no one type of breath work, and if you speak to a breathwork practitioner or if you've been to a breathwork workshop, often you're taken through guided breathwork. So I've only ever done it once, many years ago in North London, and it was amazing. I felt quite spaced out in a good way by the end of it, but incredibly relaxed. I had such good sleep for the next few weeks, and I really felt it unlocked something. I think I was quite stressed at the time, but it almost took me to another place, and I would love to do something like that again. But there's no need necessarily to do that. The point is you can do little bits yourself. And there are so many variations of breathing practice. There's alternate nostril breathing, there's box breathing, which I'm a real fan of, and I do now and again. But so that's really easy. So you literally take a breath in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then again hold for 4 seconds, and then repeat. It's called box breathing because you sort of imagine a square and each step is one side of the box, used by US Navy SEALs, no less. There's also something called 4-7-8 breathing, and the premise of that is that if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, you feel relaxed, a little bit like how you get over the panic attack. I've told this story before, but some years ago I saw a chap in the surgery who was really struggling with anxiety, so much so that they brought in a piece of paper with their symptoms written down because they weren't able to articulate it. They were feeling so down and so anxious. And a few years ago I bumped into him somewhere and he said, "Oh, you know, do you remember I came to see you about my anxiety?" And I said, "Yeah, no, I do. How are you?" And it had been many years since I'd seen him. And he said, "It's completely gone away because I've taken up archery. And one of the key elements of archery is that you have to be able to control your breathing." And although he hadn't taken it up with that in mind, you know, alleviating his anxiety, very quickly it started to help him. And so, you know, in my book, I talk about something called happy accidents, in the book, The Health Fix, in terms of behavior change. And that was one of them. He wasn't sort of taking it up with the intention of it kind of helping his anxiety, but it did. Happy accidents meaning, you know, adopting a behavior or dropping a behavior by accident that seems to help your health. So if you're up for it, I want you to try a bit of box breathing now. So I'm just going to talk you through it if you've never done it. Depending on where you are and whether it's safe to do, it might be better if you close your eyes. You don't have to. But what you do is you start with your lungs nice and empty. And then take a big deep breath in whilst counting to 4. Breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold 1, 2, 3, 4. And out for 1, 2, 3, 4. And again hold 1, 2, 3, 4. And breathe in again. It's not difficult, really. It just takes practice. And I think it's an easy thing to incorporate in your day. It's not a chore, and it's likely to be helpful. One group of people I'd really encourage to try this are smokers. So there has been some research on breathing techniques and smoking. And if you think about what you're doing when you smoke a cigarette, is you're taking a drag, usually like a slow breath, aren't you? And the same when you breathe it out. Worth thinking about. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that's made you think about breathing slightly differently, even though you're doing it right now. Obviously, there are some people out there who have chronic chest conditions and the like, and it's probably not as relevant to them. And, you know, they will be under specialist care, I'm sure. Do share, like, subscribe if you can. Thank you again for your support and all your suggestions. Keep them coming in. I do hope you have a good week. In the meantime, until we meet again, do stay well. Take care. Look after yourself. Bye for now.